Cold Creek Penitentiary was not built to be pretty. It was a monolith of granite and steel, perched on a craggy peak overlooking a perpetually gray sea. The wind howled ceaselessly around its towers, carrying with it the mournful cries of gulls and, some said, the echoes of tormented souls. Within its formidable walls resided the dregs of society, the irredeemable, the monsters humanity had deemed necessary to cage. And among them, in cell block D level 5, was Silas Thorne. Thorne was a name whispered with a chilling reverence even in Cold Creek. Serial killer, cult leader, rumored to possess an intellect as sharp as a razor and a cruelty that defied human comprehension. He had arrived 5 years prior, convicted of orchestrating a string of ritualistic murders that had gripped the nation in morbid fascination. His cell, reinforced and isolated, was considered his tomb, a place from which escape was statistically and practically impossible. Warden Abigail Blackwood, a woman carved from granite herself, with eyes that had seen too much and a resolve forged in the fires of bureaucratic nightmares and violent prison riots, strode through the sterile corridors of cell block D. It was 6 a.m. routine lockdown check. The air hung heavy, thick with the stench of stale disinfectant and something else. Something colder, less tangible. Unease perhaps. Sergeant Miller, her second in command, a man whose face always seemed etched with perpetual worry, hurried to keep pace. All clear on levels 1 through 4, Warden, he reported, his voice tight. Just level 5 to go. Level 5 was the deepest circle of Cold Creek's inferno. It housed the specials, inmates deemed too volatile, too dangerous even for the general population of maximum security. Silence reigned here, broken only by the rhythmic clang of steel doors and the distant, unsettling hum of the prison's ancient machinery. They reached cell D5-13, Silas Thorne's confinement. Officer Davies, young, fresh out of academy and still visibly unnerved by the realities of Cold Creek, stood stiffly outside the cell, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Cell D5-13, Officer Davies. Warden Blackwood's voice was clipped, professional. Report. Davies swallowed hard. Routine check completed at 5:30 hours, Warden. Inmate Thorne was present and accounted for. No unusual activity observed. Standard procedure followed? Yes, Warden. Visual confirmation through the reinforced window, auditory check, biometric scan of the cell door locked and secure. Blackwood nodded curtly. Unlock the door, officer. Davies hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously towards the small, reinforced window embedded in the steel door. Warden, are you sure? It's unsettling in there this morning. Unsettling? Davies, we deal with unsettling every day in this place. Open the cell. Her tone brooked no argument. With trembling hands, Davies inserted his keycard and punched in the access code. The heavy steel door groaned open, revealing nothing. An empty cell. Not just empty of a prisoner. It was devoid of any trace of Silas Thorne's presence. The narrow cot was neatly made, almost pristine. The steel toilet gleamed. The single, bare light bulb cast stark shadows across the cold concrete walls. There was no struggle, no sign of forced entry, no disturbance whatsoever. Just an utterly, impossibly empty cell. Warden Blackwood stepped into the cell, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Miller and Davies followed, their breath held captive in their chests. She ran a gloved hand along the cool, smooth walls, feeling for any hidden seams, any concealed panels. Nothing. The reinforced window was intact. The biometric lock, upon immediate rescan, registered as securely locked. Check the security footage, Blackwood ordered, her voice low, dangerously calm. Miller scrambled for his radio, his fingers fumbling. Security control, Sergeant Miller here. Need immediate review of cell block D level 5, cell D5-13, last 24 hours. Priority 1. The response came back crackling and distorted, but clear enough. Sergeant, stand by, reviewing, nothing. Absolutely nothing unusual in the past 24 hours. Cell D5-13 footage shows, empty cell. Always empty. No entry, no exit. Just the cell, undisturbed. Silence descended upon the small group, heavier than the steel that surrounded them. Miller stared at his radio, his face pale. Davies swayed slightly, his youthful composure crumbling. Warden Blackwood stood in the center of the empty cell, her gaze sweeping across every inch, as if expecting Thorne to materialize from the very air itself. But there was nothing. Just the impossible, undeniable truth. Silas Thorne, the most notorious prisoner in Cold Creek, had vanished. Without a trace. The initial bewilderment quickly morphed into a frantic, chaotic search. Cold Creek was thrown into lockdown. Every cell, every corridor, every ventilation shaft, every nook and cranny was searched with meticulous intensity. K-9 units sniffed through the prison, helicopters circled overhead, and armed guards swarmed the perimeter. Yet, Silas Thorne remained elusive, a ghost in the granite machine. As hours turned into days, and the search yielded nothing, a creeping paranoia began to fester in the prison's atmosphere. The guards, hardened men accustomed to violence and despair, started whispering. Whispers of magic, of deals with devils, of Thorne being something other than human. Superstition, Warden Blackwood scoffed internally, yet even she felt a cold tendril of unease coiling in her gut. The official narrative, released to the press in carefully sanitized terms, spoke of an internal security breach and an ongoing investigation. The media predictably went into a frenzy. The public, already terrified by Thorne's legacy, oscillated between fear and morbid fascination. Warden Blackwood established a dedicated investigation team, headed by herself and Detective Harding, a seasoned detective from the city police department reluctantly assigned to the baffling case. Harding was pragmatic, grounded in reality, a welcome counterpoint to the escalating irrationality within Cold Creek. "Warden," Harding said, spreading out blueprints of cell block D on the steel table in her office, "we've gone over everything. Security footage, staff records, inmate testimonies, nothing. It's like he literally ceased to exist in that cell." "Impossible," Blackwood stated, her voice tight with frustration. "There has to be a logical explanation. A hidden tunnel, a compromised guard, something we've missed." "Warden, I've been investigating disappearances for 20 years. This isn't like anything I've ever seen. No forced entry, no witnesses, no motive, no trace. Clean. Too clean." Harding's brow furrowed. "And the security footage? It's not just not showing him leaving. It's like it never showed him being there in the first place." Blackwood frowned, a cold shiver running down her spine despite herself. "What are you suggesting, detective?" "I don't know," Harding admitted, running a hand through his thinning hair. "But something about this, it feels wrong. Unnaturally wrong." As the investigation stalled, strange occurrences began within Cold Creek. Guards reported fleeting glimpses of Thorne in places he couldn't possibly be. A shadowy figure in the mess hall during lockdown, a fleeting reflection in a polished floor in a deserted corridor, a whisper of his name carried on the wind in the exercise yard. Each sighting was unsubstantiated, fleeting, easily dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. But the frequency, the sheer volume of reports, was unsettling. Then came the symbols. First, a single intricate glyph etched into the steel wall of Thorne's empty cell. It was discovered during a routine re-examination, a symbol no one recognized, yet it radiated an unsettling aura, a sense of ancient, malevolent intent. Dr. Reyes, the prison psychologist, dismissed it as inmate graffiti, a copycat prank. But then more symbols appeared in different cells in seemingly random locations throughout cell block D. They were always subtle, easily missed at first glance, scratched into walls, drawn in dust on floors, almost woven into the fabric of the prison itself. The symbols were increasingly complex, disturbingly organic, resembling a blend of ancient runes and anatomical diagrams. Each new symbol was photographed, catalogued, analyzed. Linguistics experts, cryptographers, even occult specialists were consulted. No one could identify them, no one could decipher their meaning. But their presence was undeniable, a chilling, silent language permeating the cold steel heart of Cold Creek. Warden Blackwood, initially dismissive, found herself increasingly drawn into the mystery of the symbols. She spent hours studying the photographs, the unsettling shapes seeping into her dreams, blurring the line between waking reality and nightmare. Sleep became a fractured, uneasy affair, punctuated by vivid, disturbing dreams, corridors that shifted and twisted, shadows that danced and whispered, and always in the periphery the unsettling glyphs, pulsing with an unseen energy. She started experiencing lapses in time. Moments of disorientation where she would find herself in a different location, a different part of the prison with no recollection of how she got there. She would lose minutes, sometimes hours, feeling as if a segment of her consciousness had simply blinked out of existence. Reality itself began to feel porous, unstable. The solid granite walls seemed to breathe, the shadows to deepen and shift with a life of their own, the very air to hum with an unseen, unheard frequency. Paranoia, Dr. Reyes would say. Stress, exhaustion, the immense pressure of the situation. But Blackwood knew deep down it was more than that. Something was happening in Cold Creek, something beyond the grasp of logic and reason, and it was centered around the empty cell of Silas Thorne. The sightings of Silas Thorne intensified, becoming bolder, more brazen, defying all logic and reason. No longer were they fleeting glimpses in peripheral vision. Now, guards swore they saw him directly, unmistakably, in places that were physically impossible. Officer Davies, the young guard who had first discovered the empty cell, was the first to report a truly impossible sighting. He was on patrol in cell block C, 2 levels above and completely separated from D. During a routine corridor check, he swore he saw Thorne standing at the end of the hall, silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights. Davies drew his weapon, shouting a challenge, but the figure simply vanished. Vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering chill of dread and the echoing thump of Davies's panicked heartbeat. Other reports followed, each more unsettling than the last. A kitchen worker claimed to see Thorne behind the stainless steel ovens in the locked and secured kitchen storeroom. A maintenance crew reported seeing him perched on the highest point of the watchtower, his gaunt figure outlined against the stormy sky, before he seemed to dissolve into the swirling clouds. Each sighting was investigated, debunked, dismissed as mass hysteria or elaborate pranks. Yet the descriptions were consistent. The same gaunt frame, the same piercing, unsettling eyes, the same unnervingly calm demeanor. It was always Silas Thorne, unmistakably him, yet impossibly him. Detective Harding, initially skeptical of the sightings, began to waver. The sheer volume, the consistency, the genuine terror in the guard's eyes, it was starting to erode his pragmatic defenses. "Warden," he said one evening, pacing restlessly in her office, "I've interviewed every guard who reported a sighting. They're scared, genuinely scared. And they all describe the same thing. It's not just a hallucination. It's targeted. Like, he's showing himself." "Showing himself where, detective?" Blackwood countered, her voice weary. "In locked rooms, in inaccessible areas, on top of a watchtower in the middle of a storm? It's absurd." "I know, Warden, I know. Logically it's impossible. But, what if logic doesn't apply here anymore? What if Thorne's disappearance? What if it wasn't an escape at all? What if it was something else?" Blackwood stared at him, a chilling premonition settling deep within her. "Something else? What are you implying?" Harding hesitated, his usual pragmatic composure cracking. "I don't know, Warden. But I've been researching Thorne. His background, the cult he led, it wasn't just about murder. It was about ritual, about transcendence. There are whispers, unconfirmed of course, about otherworldly practices. About summoning entities." Blackwood felt a sudden wave of nausea. Entities? Summoning? This was veering into territory she had actively avoided, dismissing it as prison folklore, as the ramblings of disturbed minds. But now, confronted with the impossible, she found herself forced to consider the unthinkable. "Detective," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper, "are you suggesting that Silas Thorne wasn't just a prisoner? That he was something else entirely?" Harding looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and grim determination. "Warden, I'm starting to think we weren't containing a prisoner. I'm starting to think Cold Creek was containing something." The thought hung in the air between them, heavy, suffocating, pregnant with unimaginable dread. The whispers in the walls seemed to grow louder, closer, resonating with a chilling, unseen presence. The prison, once a symbol of order and control, now felt like a haunted labyrinth, a place where the boundaries of reality were dissolving, and something ancient, something terrifying, was awakening. Driven by a desperate need to understand, to find some rational anchor in the swirling vortex of unreality, Warden Blackwood returned to cell D5-13. The empty cell, the epicenter of the inexplicable events, held a strange, morbid fascination. She locked herself inside, alone, with only the cold steel and concrete for company. The air in the cell felt different, heavier, charged with an unseen energy. The silence was not just the absence of sound, but a thick, oppressive blanket, muffling even her own heartbeat. She started systematically examining the cell again, inch by inch, wall by wall. She ran her hands over the surfaces, feeling for any irregularities, any hidden compartments. Nothing. It was a standard isolation cell, stripped bare, designed for maximum security and minimal human interaction. Frustration gnawed at her. There had to be something she was missing, some detail, some clue hidden in plain sight. She focused on the symbols. They were multiplying, subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet their presence was undeniable. They were etched into the steel, scratched into the concrete, almost woven into the very texture of the cell. She traced the glyphs with her fingers, her skin crawling with an inexplicable unease. As she touched one particularly complex symbol, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. The cell seemed to spin, the walls to breathe, the very air to vibrate. She stumbled back, clutching her head, her vision blurring. When her vision cleared, she gasped. Something had changed in the cell. Subtly, almost imperceptibly but undeniably changed. The shadows seemed deeper, more defined. The bare light bulb cast a harsher, more angular light. And on the wall opposite the door, a new symbol had appeared, larger, more intricate than the others. But it wasn't just a symbol. It was a message. The new glyph was surrounded by a series of smaller symbols, arranged in a linear sequence, almost like writing. Blackwood stared at it, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the chaotic jumble of shapes. Then, slowly, painstakingly, a pattern began to emerge. The symbols weren't random. They weren't just decorative. They were communicative. They were a language. An alien, unsettling, deeply disturbing language, but a language nonetheless. Blackwood spent the next hours hunched in the cell, meticulously documenting the new symbols, comparing them to the ones already catalogued. She noticed recurring patterns, variations in the glyphs, a sense of progression as if the symbols were evolving, becoming more complex, more articulate. As she deciphered the symbols, a chilling narrative began to unfold. It wasn't a story in the traditional sense, more like a fragmented, distorted echo of consciousness, a glimpse into a mind that was utterly alien and profoundly disturbing. The symbols spoke of containment, of a prison not just for Thorn, but for something within Thorn. They spoke of a pact, a bargain, a symbiotic relationship between a human host and an entity from somewhere else. They spoke of the cell not as a prison to hold Thorn, but as a ritual chamber, a nexus point, a place of transformation. And then the most terrifying revelation of all, the disappearance wasn't an escape. It was an ascension. The symbols described a process, a ritual, a deliberate shedding of the human shell, a release of the entity contained within into somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the confines of Cold Creek, beyond the limitations of human reality. The symbols ended with a chilling, final glyph, stark and simple, yet radiating an aura of profound dread. Blackwood didn't need a cryptographer to decipher it. She felt it in her bones, in the icy fear that gripped her heart. The symbol meant release. Silas Thorne hadn't escaped from Cold Creek. He had released himself. And whatever he had released was still here. Within the prison. Within the very walls that were supposed to contain it. The revelation from the symbols plunged Warden Blackwood into a maelstrom of fear and disorientation. The prison, once a symbol of control, now felt like a fragile cage holding back something vast and terrifying. And she, the warden, the protector, was standing directly in its path. Her lapses in time worsened. She would find herself in unfamiliar corridors, in dimly lit corners of the prison she had no conscious memory of reaching. Her nightmares intensified, becoming vividly real, blurring the line between sleep and waking. She saw Thorn in her dreams, not as the gaunt, imprisoned figure she had known, but as something transformed. His eyes burned with an unholy light, his features shifting, becoming less human, more ancient. The sightings of Thorn within the prison became more frequent, more blatant. He was seen walking through locked doors, materializing in empty corridors, his presence leaving behind a chilling wave of dread. The guards were on the verge of a complete breakdown, their fear contagious, spreading through Cold Creek like a disease. Dr. Reyes, witnessing Blackwood's deteriorating state, became increasingly concerned. He urged her to take a leave of absence to seek medical help. But Blackwood refused. She was the warden. It was her responsibility to understand what was happening, to protect her staff, to contain whatever Thorn had unleashed. "Warden," Reyes pleaded, his voice laced with worry, "you're not well. You're sleep-deprived, hallucinating, experiencing delusions. This is beyond your control. It's beyond any of our control." "It's not delusions, Reyes," Blackwood insisted, her voice hoarse, her eyes burning with feverish intensity. "It's real. Thorn, he didn't just escape. He unleashed something. And I have to stop it." She confided in Detective Harding, sharing her decipherment of the symbols, her growing conviction that Thorn was something more than human. Harding, initially skeptical, had witnessed too much to dismiss her concerns outright. The impossible sightings, the unsettling atmosphere, Blackwood's own obvious descent into a fractured reality, it was all converging, pointing towards something terrifyingly real. "Warden," Harding said, his voice grave, "if what you're saying is true, if Thorn was containing something, and he released it, then we're in serious trouble. We need to understand what we're dealing with. And we need to find a way to contain it again. They delved deeper into Thorn's history, his cult, his rituals. They unearthed fragmented accounts of ancient texts, forbidden knowledge, whispers of pacts with entities beyond human comprehension. The more they learned, the more terrifying the picture became. Thorn hadn't just been a serial killer. He had been a vessel, a conduit, a living gateway. And Cold Creek, unwittingly, had become the stage for his final, horrifying transformation. The prison, meant to contain the worst of humanity, was now unleashing something far worse, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality within its walls. Blackwood, driven by a mixture of duty and a chilling, morbid curiosity, knew she had to confront the entity, to understand its nature, to find a way to recontain it. But as her grip on reality loosened, as the prison itself seemed to shift and twist around her, she knew she was walking a razor's edge, teetering on the brink of madness, with the very real possibility of becoming the next to disappear. Or worse. Guided by the deciphered symbols and a growing, terrifying intuition, Warden Blackwood felt drawn back to cell D5-13. The cell, once simply empty, now pulsed with an unseen energy, a focal point of the unsettling phenomena plaguing Cold Creek. She entered the cell again, this time armed with a growing sense of dread and a desperate resolve to confront the truth. The cell felt colder than ever, the air thick with a palpable tension. The symbols on the walls seemed to shimmer, to writhe as if alive. As she stepped deeper into the cell, the walls around her seemed to shift, the dimensions of the room to distort. The familiar steel and concrete dissolved into something else, something organic, pulsating, almost fleshy. The air grew heavy, cloying, thick with a strange, metallic scent. She was no longer in cell D5-13. She was somewhere else. The prison corridors had transformed into a labyrinth of twisting, organic tunnels, pulsating with a faint, bioluminescent light. The walls were no longer steel and concrete, but a living, breathing tissue, throbbing with a slow, rhythmic pulse. Whispers echoed through the labyrinth, not the panicked whispers of guards, but something deeper, more ancient, carried on the very air itself. She knew instinctively that she was in the heart of the entity's influence, within the distorted reality that Silas Thorne had unleashed. This was not a physical place but a psychic space, a manifestation of the entity's consciousness, woven into the fabric of Cold Creek itself. Driven by a desperate hope to understand and, if possible, to reverse what had happened, Blackwood ventured deeper into the labyrinth. The tunnels twisted and turned, leading her through a shifting, surreal landscape. She saw glimpses of familiar prison elements, distorted and warped, cell doors that melted and reformed, corridors that stretched into infinity, watchtowers that reached into a sky that was no longer the gray sky of Cold Creek, but a swirling vortex of colors beyond human comprehension. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They seemed to coalesce into a voice, not an audible voice, but a telepathic presence, resonating directly within her mind. It spoke in fragmented thoughts, in unsettling images, in emotions that defied human description. It spoke of hunger. Of a thirst for something beyond physical sustenance, a hunger for consciousness, for energy, for the very essence of being. It spoke of Thorne as a willing vessel, a collaborator in its release, a means to an end. It spoke of Cold Creek not as a prison but as a breeding ground, a fertile field for its insidious growth. And then, the most chilling communication of all. It spoke of Blackwood herself. It saw her, knew her, understood her deepest fears, her hidden vulnerabilities, her unspoken desires. It offered her a choice. To join it, to become part of its growing consciousness, to transcend the limitations of human reality, to become something more. The offer was seductive, terrifying, and strangely alluring. Blackwood felt a pull, a subtle, insidious temptation to surrender, to let go of her struggling grasp on reality, to embrace the alien consciousness that was unfolding around her. But something within her, a core of granite resolve forged in years of confronting the darkness of human nature, resisted. She was Warden Blackwood. She was the protector. And she would not surrender. Not to this. Not to anything. Blackwood, fighting against the seductive whispers and the dissolving reality, pushed deeper into the labyrinth. She knew she had to confront the entity, to understand its true nature, to find a way to sever its connection to Cold Creek. Or to contain it once more if that was even possible. She reached a vast, cavernous chamber, the heart of the labyrinth. The bioluminescent light pulsed here, stronger, brighter, illuminating a scene that defied description. The walls were covered in the unsettling symbols, pulsating with energy. In the center of the chamber, a form began to coalesce, to take shape from the swirling chaos. It wasn't Silas Thorne, not entirely. It was his form, vaguely human but distorted, elongated, stretched and twisted into something grotesque and unnatural. Its eyes burned with an unholy light, reflecting the swirling chaos of the labyrinth. Its limbs moved with a fluid, unsettling grace, defying the constraints of human anatomy. This was the entity, manifested, unleashed, using Thorne's form as a vessel, a puppet to interact with the human world. It was vast, ancient, something beyond human comprehension, and it was now, unmistakably, within Cold Creek. The entity spoke to Blackwood again, its voice a chorus of whispers directly in her mind, amplified, intensified in the heart of its labyrinth. "Warden, you have come to the heart. You have understood. Join us. Become one with the Ascension." Blackwood stood firm, her resolve hardening in the face of unimaginable dread. "Who are you? What are you?" She projected her thoughts back at the entity, her voice echoing in the psychic space. The entity rippled, shifted, its form distorting further. "We are the unbound. We are the echoes of the void. We are the hunger that sleeps between stars. We have been contained too long." Thorne, he understood. He opened the way. "What way?" Blackwood demanded, her voice trembling but resolute. "What do you want?" "We want expansion. Assimilation. To consume, to integrate, to become all." The entity's voice resonated with an ancient, cosmic hunger. "Cold Creek is a nexus, a point of convergence. We will spread from here. We will consume everything." Horror, cold and visceral, gripped Blackwood. This wasn't just about Cold Creek. It was about something far larger, far more terrifying. This entity, this unbound, sought to consume reality itself, starting with the prison, spreading outwards like a cancer infecting the world. "No," Blackwood projected, her voice filled with a desperate defiance. "I won't let you." The entity laughed, a soundless, chilling reverberation within her mind. "You? A single human? Against the unbound? You are insignificant. You are prey." But Blackwood was not just prey. She was Warden Blackwood. She was the protector. And in her hand, hidden within her coat, she clutched a small silver locket, a worn family heirloom, a relic from her father, a former law enforcement officer who had instilled in her a deep, unwavering sense of duty. Inside the locket, pressed against her skin, was a dried sprig of wolfsbane, a seemingly insignificant herb, but one that her father, a man who had seen his own share of darkness, had always insisted carried a protective power against certain things. It was a desperate gamble, a reliance on superstition, on something beyond logic and reason. But in this reality-fractured labyrinth, logic had ceased to matter. Only will and perhaps faith remained. Blackwood held the locket aloft, focusing her will, her fear, her defiance into the small silver object. "You may be the unbound," she projected, her voice echoing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "But this is my prison. And you are not welcome here." As Blackwood held the locket aloft, the chamber pulsed with a raw, untamed energy. The entity recoiled, its distorted form flickering, its unholy eyes narrowing with a sudden, unexpected pain. "What is that trinket?" the entity hissed, its voice laced with a venomous surprise. "What protection do you wield?" Blackwood didn't know, not truly. She only knew her father's words, whispered tales of ancient protections, of the power of belief, of the resilience of the human spirit against the encroaching darkness. She channeled her fear, her anger, her unwavering resolve into the locket, projecting her will outwards, focusing all her energy on the simple silver object. "This is my will," she projected, her voice echoing in the labyrinth. "This is my prison. And you are contained again. Now." A wave of energy erupted from the locket, a blinding surge of light that ripped through the labyrinth. The organic tunnels shuddered, the pulsating light flickered and dimmed, the whispers faltered, silenced. The entity shrieked, a soundless, psychic scream of pure agony, its form convulsing, dissolving, recoiling from the emanating power. The labyrinth began to collapse, the organic walls crumbling, the distorted reality dissolving back into the familiar steel and concrete of Cold Creek. Blackwood staggered back, shielding her eyes from the blinding light, the locket burning hot in her hand. She found herself back in cell D5-13. The cell was no longer empty. In the center of the room, collapsed on the floor, was a figure. Gaunt, pale, weakened, but undeniably Silas Thorne. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, his body racked with tremors. The unholy light was gone from his eyes, replaced by a flicker of human vulnerability, of pain, of exhaustion. The symbols on the walls were fading, dissolving into nothingness, leaving behind only faint, almost imperceptible traces. The oppressive atmosphere in the cell was lifting, replaced by a cold, stark silence, the silence of a prison cell, not the silence of the void. Detective Harding and a squad of armed guards burst into the cell, weapons raised. They stared at the scene in disbelief, Warden Blackwood standing over a collapsed Silas Thorne in a cell that was, once again, just a cell. "Warden!" Harding exclaimed, lowering his weapon, relief and confusion warring in his voice. What happened here?" Blackwood looked around the cell, at Thorne, at the fading symbols, at the bewildered faces of her guards. She was exhausted, drained, her mind still reeling from the psychic onslaught, from the terrifying reality she had just confronted. "I think," she said, her voice hoarse, barely a whisper, "I think we contained him." Again. Epilogue: The lingering shadow. Silas Thorne was alive. He was weak, disoriented, suffering from what the prison doctors diagnosed as severe psychological trauma and physical exhaustion. He remembered nothing of his disappearance, of the symbols, of the labyrinth, of the entity. He claimed to have simply woken up in his cell, confused and inexplicably drained. The official narrative, carefully crafted and meticulously disseminated, attributed Thorne's disappearance to a complex, previously undiscovered ventilation shaft and a period of severe, stress-induced fugue state. The symbols were explained away as elaborate inmate graffiti, their unsettling nature attributed to mass hysteria and psychological contagion within the prison. The public, eager for a rational explanation, accepted the sanitized version of events. The media frenzy subsided. Cold Creek officially was back under control. But for Warden Blackwood and for those few guards and staff who had witnessed the impossible, the truth remained, a chilling, unspoken undercurrent beneath the veneer of normalcy. They had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension, something ancient and terrifying, lurking just beyond the edges of reality. The symbols were gone, physically erased from the walls of Cold Creek. But in the quiet moments, in the long, lonely nights, Blackwood could still see them, etched in her mind, pulsing with an unseen energy. She could still hear the whispers, faint echoes in the silence, reminding her of the vast, cosmic hunger that had almost breached their world. The locket, the silver heirloom containing the sprig of wolfsbane, became her constant companion. She wore it always, a tangible reminder of the desperate gamble she had taken, the thin line that had held back the darkness. Cold Creek remained Cold Creek, a monolith of granite and steel, still housing the worst of humanity. But something had changed within its walls. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a lingering chill in the air, a sense of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The prisoner who escaped without a trace had returned. But the trace he left behind, that was something Cold Creek and perhaps the world would never truly escape. The truth, buried beneath layers of official denial and rationalization, remained, a haunting secret, a chilling reminder that some prisons are not built to contain men, but to hold back things far more terrifying. And sometimes even the strongest walls can be breached, leaving behind only whispers, shadows, and the lingering, unsettling feeling that something ancient and hungry is still watching, waiting just beyond the veil.